Welcome to Sensing the Signal. I'm Terry Patar from Atreides. We're exploring the overlap between data, technology and intelligence in our increasingly volatile and complex world, what this means for national security, and how deeper insight can help organisations make better decisions. I've spent the past 20 years helping organisations improve their intelligence capabilities. I'm fascinated by how we understand the world around us. Now I get to talk to some of the leading voices who I've learned from myself.
This time on Sensing the Signal, we've taken the show on the road. We are at the DSEI Defence Exhibition, where there are thousands of companies and thousands of people wandering around. You will hear them no doubt in the background as we talk to some of the experts who are either exhibiting or attending the show, and we find out what the latest defence technology trends are that we should all be interested in. So one of the amazing things about this show is the international aspect, and there are people here from all over the world. And I'm joined now by Clay Hicks from Zignal Labs. And Clay, you've come over from the US. How have you found the show this week?
First and foremost, it is massive.
Right.
I've been to a number of different shows in the US, whether it's TechNet, Army USA, Soft Week down in Tampa. This might be 5 to 10 times the size of a number of those shows. It's massive.
Yeah. And talk us through a bit about yourself. So I've been really interested to talk to you, and I'm glad I managed to catch up with you. Talk to us a little bit about your background and your role at Zignal Labs.
Sure. I've been at Zignal Labs for a little over 2.5 years. I serve as a mission director. And so Zignal Labs just generally is a large-scale collector of open source information of various types, blogs, vlogs, media, social media, those types of things. But then the ability to turn it into operational intelligence, text, narrative, and image and video. And that was a large learning curve for me because I retired out of the FBI after about 21 years and began to use open source intelligence for many of the investigations I was working on 10, 15 years ago, but it was done as a manual service in essence.
Yeah.
And now with the advent of many of these platforms that utilize various forms of AI on the language side as well as the image and video side, the capability to utilize that form of intelligence for defense, intelligence community type stuff, federal government of various forms, commercial, is really kind of exploded. So when we come to events like this, there's 100 different ways that you can approach that from various elements. And certainly with the UK and the US being such close allies, it makes sense to kind of be marching in a similar direction on those things, with everyone having similar intelligence or access to that intelligence, and then they can make their individual national decisions off of that.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, especially what you talked about there in terms of AI and how that's come into the platform and the tools that you're building at Zignal. Can you talk to us a bit more about some of the newer technology and all the newer trends that you're seeing and that are helping develop the capabilities that you're kind of putting out there in the market?
Absolutely. So the big push over the last number of years has been, the utilization of large language models for lots of different things. But what we're seeing is, and this is all over, so it's nothing new, but what we're seeing is that large language models, while very helpful in a lot of ways, if they're not trained on your particular use case, then there are all kinds of bad things that can happen. And sometimes they're bad and sometimes they're just problematic that you need to deal with. And so what we have done on our platform, and many others are doing as well, is utilizing small language models and various different things to come together to create what's known as agentic AI. So where it's not simply analyzing the data and then providing some sort of an output, you actually tell it what you want it to do. And it will actually not only analyze the data, bring together conclusions, but then also build outputs for you. And so it acts as an actual agent doing what you want it to do. And so that's really what we've been pushing into in the last year, I would say, is the utilization of the small language models, large language models, and then moving into agentic AI in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of analysts that are responsible for analyzing any number of types of information and data that comes in, and turning that into operational and useful intelligence without just completely overwhelming them.
I mean, and that sounds increasingly important given what you were talking about in terms of the scale of the data. I mean, you're dealing with this massive. Maybe you can give us an idea of how large is the data. When you talk about massive scale data, what are you talking about there?
Yeah, without question. And so even just the relatively narrow slice that we bring in, you're still talking about potentially 10 or 12 billion posts per day. So just social media alone, there are 29 million terabytes of information created daily.
Wow.
Daily.
Yeah.
And that's just one slice of the open source information that's out there. And so that just gives you a flavor. If you are an analyst working for MOD or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for any of these countries, the daunting task that lay before you, because the various intelligence components, whether they are embedded in a defense department or they're an intelligence agency in and of themselves, are responsible for all the data that's out there. And just having a tool is not enough. You need to have a suite of tools, because the volume of information that's out there, no one tool has access to it all, nor could they process it and turn it into usable conclusions in any meaningful way. And so it's a daunting task. And this is where the combination, like I said, of small language models, large language models, image and video models, all these different things melding into agentic forms where you tell it what you're interested in and you tell it what you want it to do, and it brings all of this together for you. Now, at the same time, the danger is that you simply get a conclusion that you rely upon. And that's one of the things that's sort of embedded into our platform, and there are others as well, is that all of this AI is built into the system such that it's subservient to the human. The human always has the ability to go see why the conclusion, why the platform arrived at any particular output or conclusion. And so I think that's a key component, regardless of what space or information space you're talking about, because at the end of the day, we can't have machines telling us what decisions we should make. They need to help us with our decision making, but we can't simply rely on their conclusions.
That's fascinating. And just last question for you, because I'm sure you've got other things you want to see at the show, and there is so much to see here. But thinking back to your experience of your career in the FBI and all the work that you did there, given the capabilities that are now on offer in the kind of commercial space that are available to law enforcement and government agencies, etc., what are the kind of use cases that, and without giving away anything sensitive from anything you worked on, but what are the kind of use cases where you would have loved to have used these capabilities if you were still doing that type of work in that type of role? Yeah, maybe talk us through how it works as a workflow.
Absolutely. So, for example, I can talk about this. This is sort of a public case where we were working transnational criminal organizations in the U.S. that were reached down into Mexico, Central and South America for their various activities. And the amount of information I had coming in to process, and this wasn't even, massive amounts of social media and doing global analysis and things like that. We're just talking this relatively narrow slice of an investigative priority. That required a number of intelligence analysts working on this almost full time, so that they could simply bring out from our human source reporting, our technical source reporting from collections that we either classified collection or court-ordered collection or whatever the case may be, bringing that into our systems at the FBI. we literally had to review all of this manually, right? Call by call, email by email, text by text, whatever it was, surveillance report by surveillance report, all of these different things that every major investigative agency does. And the ability to then load all of that into what is now some form of AI to look for patterns, look for various things that I can now see a pattern, but sometimes it's not the pattern that makes most sense, it's the deviation. Right? So when the deviation happens, I know something has happened in the criminal network that I'm probably very interested in. And so things like that, the ability to do that, will exponentially increase the capability of the analysts as well as the investigators to get to things that are really crucial, really important, whether you're talking about preventing terrorist acts, espionage activity, traditional criminal activity, large-scale criminal activity, those types of things, going after large organizations with only a handful of people becomes much, much more possible now in an effective way. We've been doing it for years. It just becomes much more effective and efficient with these types of tools.
That's fantastic. Clay, it's been great to talk to you.
I'll
let you get on to go with the rest of the show, and I hope we can catch up at some point in the near future and talk some more, because I want to definitely delve into some of that stuff. So
absolutely, happy to do it.
All right. Okay, I'm joined by Enrique Oti, Chief Strategy Officer from Second Front Systems. Enrique, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And I'm obviously just going around especially the tech zone at DSEI, talking to some really interesting companies who are showing off some really good capabilities. I'd love to find out more, and I'm sure the audience would, about what Second Front does, and maybe talk us through a little bit about the company and your capabilities.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer, and I live here in London, and I'm leading the UK and European expansion of Second Front Systems. We are a U.S. defense company, and really was born out of the idea that the warfighter needs access to the best technologies. And the problem is it sometimes takes a long time to get those technologies into the hands of the warfighter. So we're not here to solve acquisitions, procurement, contract problems. We can't solve that. But we can solve the other issue, which is how do you technically get software into the hands of the warfighter? So what we do is we run a security and compliance platform on top of government clouds, classified clouds, sovereign clouds. And so we can take commercial companies, we can bring their software onto our platform, and in doing so, they inherit our infrastructure, our policies, our security observability, a lot of our compliance. And at the end of the day, we can take their compliance journey down from a couple years in some cases, down to a couple weeks or a couple months. And we've been doing this in the US for a few years now at unclassified, secret, top secret, special operations networks. And now we're expanding over here to the UK and NATO to try to help out the allies overall get access to better tech.
That's great. And for anyone who's maybe not familiar with that kind of domain you're working in,
sure,
they probably won't appreciate the challenge that actually you're solving, because I know from the experience in the defense tech sector and working with government customers, it's a real challenge getting those compliance certifications and being where you need to be in order to put your software in front of the end users.
Yeah.
So maybe, if you could talk a bit more about what the challenge is there and how you guys are resolving that, and what the capability offers to everybody in terms of the software providers maybe who want to come on board.
Well, honestly, we're not there just to help the software providers. This is a challenge for the government as well. So both sides face the challenge, and the issue is compliance is in and of itself is fine. Like, we are not against compliance, but over the years, compliance has become a very manual, paperwork-driven process. So you have various frameworks, Secure by Design, JSP 453, NIST frameworks. In Australia, you have IRAP. So you have the government create these frameworks for very good reasons. But the process to go through them become very laborious, very difficult. A lot of these commercial companies who have never worked with the government, like you kind of brought up, is like they've never heard of these frameworks. They don't know how to fill out the documents. They don't understand what the question to be asked. And at the same time, the security assessors and compliance officials on the government side, they're overwhelmed. They have their users walk around places like DSEI, they see hundreds of cool pieces of software, and they're like, oh, I want that and that and that. And their compliance officer's like, I don't have time to look at 5, 10, 15 new applications and read hundreds of pages of compliance data. So that's where we come in. We try to take this compliance process from being paperwork and manual to being what it should be in the modern technical world, data-driven, software-driven, automated, so that we can look at software, bring it into the environment, run it, and guarantee to the government officials that yes, it is secure, and we can show you the data to prove that.
That's superb, especially in the context of DSEI this year, where we were talking to the organisers and they were telling us that the tech zone has massively expanded this year. There's a lot of companies here who are not traditionally from the defence tech sector, and so they might be in exactly that position you described, where they don't know actually what the requirements are and how to meet them. So I guess for those companies in particular, it is a particularly attractive or potentially really useful solution.
It is. Yeah. And we're seeing that again. We've had a few years of experience in the United States doing this for the US government. And what we're seeing is that we used to think this was just for those startups. We're like, oh, it's the startups, the dual use, they're trying to get into government, they don't know how to do it. And that was probably our initial market. But what we've realized is this is a pain point for even large companies. Even the big defense primes have this as a pain point. And for them, it really comes down to an efficiency issue. Is do they want to burn their best resource and engineers filling out compliance paperwork, configuring things, when they can work with us and have an automated platform, and we already have those relationships with those accreditors to ensure that their software gets up and running. That's
really interesting. And thinking more broadly, like defense tech, as we talked about, has grown and is growing. What are the kind of trends you're seeing, and where do you see the kind of space going from the perspective of Second Front?
Right. So obviously the trend, there's two. There's drones and there's AI.
Right.
Like you walk around the floor here, it is incredible how many drones you see and how many AI companies are there. And actually at our booth right now, we actually have 3 of our own AI companies that we host with us. One is Cohere, another is Cover, and another is Lazarus. So these are AI companies that we host for the Department of Defense in the United States. And again, they're also trying to expand here to the UK. So I think what it does for us at Second Front is we're really focused on how does our platform take the kind of security that we already provide for application access, and how do we integrate model access? So we work with AWS, with Bedrock, to provide AWS Bedrock models access for our app developers that are building on those apps. We work to onboard secure LLMs into our environment as well, to make available to end users as well as other customers that need to use an LLM. And so I think a lot of what we're doing is driving towards making AI tooling accessible in a secure manner. Our next step is then, and again, based off of conversations, honestly, the last 2 days with the MOD, is the idea of how do we take our security pipelines and not just look at cybersecurity, but how do we look at AI security, model fragility, model security, and so that as AI applications are coming to our environment, the MOD can say, yes, we have run scans, and we can have a certain level of confidence that the AI is secure. And so that's really what we're trying to drive at. And this is like, honestly, there's not a lot of documentation or guidance out there on how to do AI compliance and AI security. So I think this is an amazing time for the MOD to kind of lead turn the compliance community and kind of come up with their own standards of how they can use AI securely and safely.
That's great. Enrique, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. This has been fascinating.
No, thank you for the interview. I appreciate it.
It's been great wandering around at DSEI and meeting some new people, but it's also great to meet some old friends of the show. Tony Reeves from Maiar, welcome.
Terry, nice to see you again. Yeah. And Ronnie, who's pressing the buttons. Nice to see you both.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on day 3 of the show now. You've been here all week.
Yes.
How's it been?
It's been exhausting. I think this has been the best DSEI I've attended, and I've come to a few, floor walking and having a stand. What's been interesting is the quality of the approaches that we've had. So I think particularly, well, maybe assigned to the train strikes. I think it's put people off that might have heretofore been tire kickers. We've certainly seen people coming up to us who are really interested in what we do, and we've had an interesting presence across 3 stands this week.
But how much is that also reflective of the general dynamics in the industry at large in terms of, and defence tech, defence generally in terms of the threat picture being what it is right now globally, and the emphasis being placed on defence? We talked about the SDR previously and what you were kind of expecting to get out of that, and obviously we've seen what the government's done since then, but are you kind of also seeing that being reflected here in terms of the conversations you've had, that there is now more urgency, more kind of actual interest in doing things that maybe before was a bit less obvious, perhaps?
Yeah, I think the urgency is absolutely there, and we're seeing a real uptick in approaches and organisations that are coming to speak to us that want something today. What can you offer today? Not what capability could you deliver me next year or in 2 years' time. And we all know that MOD, and not just the UK MOD, but acquisition cycles are long, very, very lengthy life cycles. But there's certainly more questions around tempo. How fast can you go? How much can you deliver us? Do you have it today? And what difference can you make to us? That's been the tone of everything we've had over the last 3 days.
Wow. And what kind of things have you seen at the show, or have you talked about with other people that may be getting you excited?
I think for us, really it's the increase in the use of commercial data.
Right.
So traditional sources, very classified, all of that stuff that we talked about before. But there's a lot of access to open source intelligence, commercially purchasable data. Space has grown really fast. And I think here there are probably 20 suppliers that have something to offer. And clearly, the likes of Maiar, who are, they have 2 stands here, which is interesting. That seems to be a busy place to go. There's a lot of business around that stand. So that's the thing that I've seen change the most. Clearly, technology, ships, tanks, aeroplanes, and so on. That's always going to be a feature of this show. But the other strong thing I think is data.
Yeah.
The need for good data and the use of data and how to exploit it. That's the theme. It's interesting that that's very difficult to show on a stand, and you can't stand in front of a piece of data and show some senior officer how great it is. But actually, it's their understanding of the value of what that represents as potential and that warfighting edge.
Yeah.
And I think there's now an understanding of data and AI could be the edges that we need in the coming years.
And we talked on the previous episode we did together about what we were expecting or hoping for from the SDR. Maybe give us briefly your take on it. What did you make of it when it came out?
I think it's gone a long way to solve some of the problems. And I think personally, from our company's perspective, intelligence and targeting, those are 2 things that we're very strong on. Research, clearly, likewise, and the advent of the UK Defence Innovation Organisation, that's certainly going to help. The biggest challenge we have, though, is it's all next year. And what we'd really like to see is advanced spending against the propositions in SDR to try and accelerate it. Because if we try and accelerate from a standing start this time, well, when would it be? April to June next year, that's going to be more tricky. I think we have to try and get the funding, or at least some of the funding, started today.
Yeah, that's interesting. And do you think that's an issue that's unique maybe to SMEs? Because there's obviously a big push for SMEs to get more, or a bigger slice of the pie, I suppose. Or is it something that actually is affecting the primes as well?
I think it's affecting everybody.
Right.
But you feel it more in an SME. And I think our runways tend to be shorter. But I think from an SME perspective, there are things that we could do now to advance that warfighting position much more quickly. And the insights and the innovations that is well recognised that that's SME territory, we should be finding avenues to exploit those. The single biggest challenge, I think, is the current way that the MED acquires capability isn't fit for purpose in terms of SME access.
Right.
And handing responsibility to manage an ecosystem of SMEs to a big prime causes its own problems. And although it is a way of accessing those capabilities, it's never comfortable. And I think that there is a solution here that potentially an SME-only ecosystem with direct access could be a really good thing to do. And that's something I'm promoting.
Yeah, very interesting. Tony, it's been great to talk to you and get your thoughts, not just on DSEI, but the defence sector right now and where we're at and what we're seeing in terms of current trends. Hopefully we'll get to talk again soon and we won't leave it so long.
I hope so. Perhaps a repeat appearance on the podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Tony.
Great to see you.
It's towards the end of another busy day at DSEI. It's the 11th of September. There's another day of the show to go, and I've been joined by Neil Sexton, who is the show spokesperson. Neil, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to talk to you. It'd be great to get your impressions of how the week's gone and just to talk about some of the general themes that have come out of this week.
Sure.
And some of the highlights, maybe.
Well, we're just about keeping energy levels up after what have been 3 full-on days with about 10,000 people every day here amongst these 1,700 exhibitors. And all around us still there's a buzz. A few people starting to leave, but of course we've got one more day to go. Let me just talk about what we've put across here in the course of the week. Firstly, with an overall theme of preparing the future force, DSEI felt it was really important to break that down a bit. The first part, there were 3 parts. The first part that we broke it down to was how we make the current capabilities that our armed forces and security forces have more resilient and how we secure those supply chains and all of the people and the individuals working within those chains for the conflicts that are facing us right now and today. The second theme, though, was how we harness the new technology, the sort of technology that's been on display in the 100 plus, particularly in the 100 plus exhibitors in the tech zone, many of them non-traditional. How do we harness that technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, all of the things that now are getting into our everyday lives, into the defence and security industry? And thirdly, as a theme, and we'll pick this up in the last day of the conference, of the show tomorrow, how do we sustain the ability of our countries, both the UK and our NATO and other allies, to produce people of the right talent and skill to give us that people edge anywhere in the defence enterprise? It's not just about the armed forces, it's about the innovation and the engineering, both heavy metal but also more and more computer engineering that sits behind what we produce as capability to put in the hands of soldiers, sailors and air people.
That's really interesting that you've described those themes there that have really come through, and I think I've certainly seen some of that as I've been walking around and talking to people and having discussions with some of the exhibitors and some of the people who visited. From the conversations that you've had as you've been going around the show, what have been people's responses, and especially within the context we're in? If we look at the broader global context and just some of the events of this week, we've seen Russian drones crossing the border into Poland. We don't yet probably know the full details of that, but it's another demonstration of technology being used in a way that probably a lot of the companies here and a lot of the government representatives will be keeping a keen eye on, because it represents a lot of what they're also working on.
Yes, and of course DSEI has really been a convening authority for exhibitors and delegations from across the world. We've had 32 country pavilions here, 66 countries have been invited by the UK government to send official delegations, and one of the things that we've really highlighted is the need to learn lessons from current conflicts, particularly Ukraine, very quickly, and to turn those into capability, because some of the new capability that the Ukrainians have very successfully and boldly put into their defense against the Russian invasion have of course been countered by the Russians, and they're then having to adapt again. That speed of innovation has been picked up by speakers across all of the fora here in the conference side of this exhibition, particularly defence ministers. We had Luke Pollard on Tuesday, and I beg your pardon, on Wednesday, and then we had the Secretary of State for Defence today. Both of them saying the way we've done business in the past, even our urgent operational requirements systems have not been fast enough to allow industry and the military to work together effectively to get that kit in the hands of those who need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually something I picked up on. I attended the keynote given by the Director of Procurement from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defence, where he touched on the speed at which they're now procuring. They've got it down to 2 weeks and in some cases 5 days. But he also talked a lot about how the Ukrainians have found that they need to be very open in what they're doing. Because they need to get that public buy-in for people to understand what it is that they're doing, because they are spending such a huge amount on defence right now. Do we see that theme also coming through here? Because it's obviously something that was touched on in the SDR for the UK.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the United Kingdom Strategic Defence Review centred on a national approach to defence. Things are having to change in a way that perhaps those of us a bit older might just about remember from our youths in the Cold War. But defence has been off the front pages for quite a long time. And with the most recent attacks by drones on Ukraine by Russia through Polish airspace, closing down the airport in Warsaw, a NATO capital city, absolutely, I think all around the exhibitors here, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that they're very alive to that imminent threat. And on top of that, what we're trying to do in DSEI is demystify defence a little bit, because most people amongst our young people and their careers advisors are not that familiar with what a defence career entails. Of course, they'll know what the armed forces are in each of their countries, whether that's the UK or elsewhere. But tomorrow's Next Generation event is all about advising people who are advising young people on careers in engineering of all sorts, and also in defence in a wider sense. And we hope to demystify so that people understand what we mean by things that we all understand, like logistics, which play such a key role in enabling military capability.
Yeah, and especially I think when you touched on it earlier, when you mentioned all the new technology that's coming through, the new types of skills that are needed for that, and maybe building a more diverse workforce is going to be an important part of that, not just for government and in defence, but in industry as well. And I suppose it's really interesting seeing that theme for DSEI this year, having that next generation dedicated day to have people coming in and learning about defence and or talking about defence from that perspective. In terms of other future trends, as well as the sort of workforce element, what other things have come out to you this week that you see going forward beyond this week that people should be keeping an eye out for, whether they're in industry or whether they're in government in defence?
Well, unsurprisingly, because it's in the news every day anyway, drones.
Right.
But actually, when you look around you, there's plenty of drones hanging from the ceiling, remotely piloted air systems or uncrewed air systems. Yeah. But there are plenty of uncrewed land platforms as well, so ground platforms. And then we've had through the week waterborne demonstrations of surface vessels that are remotely piloted, and there are plenty here on display that are underwater drones as well. That is obviously one growth area which all of the armed forces who've been visiting have been talking about and wanting to know about. The other side of that coin, of course, and this is warfare, isn't it, that as soon as you've got a new weapon system like uncrewed systems, someone needs to be able to counter it. So there are plenty of stands as well here talking about counter-drone activity, which in a security sense, in terms of securing the national infrastructure of any country, is absolutely critical. We know what happened at Gatwick a couple of years ago, an airport closed down by a drone sighting, and countries are really alive to these challenges.
And I think that's where it comes round, I suppose, from thinking about the things you've mentioned there, which is not just skills and technology, but within defence, but also outside, because that will come into then bringing in companies that maybe aren't from traditional defence sector, but are more civilian, and where we get into this sort of what we call dual use, I suppose, in terms of what they're developing and things that might come out of the defence sector and go into other places.
And it's a two-way flow. Yeah. In the olden days, it was quite often the case that militaries were designing technology that then ended up in civil life. At the moment, it's going both ways. So there's that rapid innovation in Ukraine with various systems being developed, which will bleed across into our civil lives. However, we've also got some non-traditional, non-defence companies, not traditional defence companies coming here for the first time, the largest of which I would mention as being Amazon. Amazon Web Services here has been involved in secure data repositories for many years and are now working with governments allied to other companies using artificial intelligence. Open source intelligence being sifted through so much more quickly through AI, which is a blend of civil and military technologies working together.
I guess the challenge there is, because one of the things we have heard, I think, through the week is that it's not just about the hardware, and there's plenty of hardware on display. Big vehicles, you mentioned the UAVs hanging from the ceilings, all of that, but it's about the data and software as well, which is becoming an increasingly important aspect of defence technology. That's tricky for companies to display, but they are here and they are showing off their capabilities.
And I think one of the things you notice is somebody talked to me yesterday, asked me a question about, is this just toys for boys? And the first thing I said is, this is not a game.
Right.
Secondly, it's not just about boys or men. Actually, there's much more diversity amongst the workforce. And if you go down to the tech zone, and I know you've been there already, what you see is young people who've got a background in computer science in some form, some of them from industries like gaming and so on, who've come across into the defence sector where they're used to the sort of work, but applying it in a slightly different direction. If you go across behind you now to the medical section, robotics medicine, which has been really rapidly developed as a result of the significant casualties the Ukrainians are taking over the last couple of years, with NATO allies learning the lessons there, bringing them home to their own countries, and then using those in their national health services.
I think that's a really positive note to probably end on there, Neil. That's a nice way to, I think, tie together all those different themes and threads. It's been great to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed your time here at DSEI.
Yeah, thanks. So DSEI 2025, what was it like being here? I've been here for the last couple of days, and it's been fascinating to wander around and see some of the things on display, talk to some of the most interesting companies that are coming through this year, especially in the tech zone. We spoke to a few people who we'd met for the first time, as well as some old friends who'd been on the show before. But what you really don't get from listening to some of this is the impression that you get when you're actually here, which John Pentreath mentioned in our last episode, it can be an assault on the senses, just the scale of it and the thousands of people walking around. But also, what was most poignant today was the minute's silence we had to mark the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in the US. And it really gave a moment of reflection to think about how the global threat environment has changed over the last 25 years, how geopolitics has changed, and the world of technology has obviously changed massively as well. All of those things come together to really drive and shape a lot of the things that we're seeing, not just at the show, but outside, in the world of defense, in technology, and in the spaces that we operate in. And this is not something that is confined to just the defense sector. This is now on the front pages. This is the news that affects people's everyday lives. This is events going on right now that may not be on their own as memorable as 9/11 perhaps, but are building up to a greater threat picture in many ways. We've gone from counter-terrorism to state-backed threats or state-level threats, and wars breaking out all over the world. This is giving us a lot of pause for thought in terms of where we go next. And we've seen a lot of that in the show this week. The themes that have come through, how we need to get new technology coming through rapidly and in the hands of the people who need to use it. But those people also need to have the right skills, the right experience to be able to make use of that technology. This is no doubt the kind of things we're going to hear about a lot more over the coming weeks and months and years. And we'll see how things develop, but there's a lot to be optimistic about from what we've seen this week, as well as definitely things that we should be concerned about when we look outside and what's going on around the world.
Sensing the Signal is brought to you by Atreides, the behavioural analytics company. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find out more about what we do at atreides.io.